Welcome to Illuminating Catholics, podcast of the Diocese of Sioux City. I'm Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese. Together with Carmen Bauer of the Faith Formation Office, we will shed light upon topics of faith in the modern church. Our guests include Catholic clergy, religious sisters, and other experts in their fields to help us understand what's happening in the church today. We will explore issues, even the tough ones, and to find answers to common questions about Catholicism. Thank you for joining us for today's Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Welcome back to Illuminating Catholics. I am Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese of Sioux City.
And I am Carmen Bauer. I am the Director of Faith Formation.
Welcome back. We're so grateful to everyone for listening and subscribing to the podcast. We keep growing our number of downloads, both people that are listening to it from the YouTube channel and also your podcast apps and from the website. We don't care how you listen. As long as you're listening and learning something, it's awesome. So our vision for the Illuminating Catholics podcast is that we wanted to explore different angles of the faith and, as you hear in our intro, even the hard topics. And a difficult topic that has been in the news and discussed around kitchen tables right now is in vitro fertilization and how the Catholic Church views this practice. Also, Bishop Nicholas issued a bilingual letter in English and Spanish on March 7th explaining the Church's teachings. He felt that it was time to shed a little light on the topic, and so he did distribute that widely. So, in that light, we are so pleased that Katie McMahon of Shiloh Post-IVF Ministry is joining us today. It's video conferencing, but technically she's in the studio with us. So, thank you so much for doing that, Katie, and coming to share your story, your personal story, and what Shiloh offers to the Catholic parent.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Katie, we are so happy to have you joining us today. Your story is just such an incredible example of God's grace in our life, his desire to always call him back to himself and to offer his healing presence. But before we enter into that story, would you be able to share a little bit about yourself, where you're located, a little bit about your family?
Sure. So I am a member of a parish in the Diocese of Charlotte in North Carolina. I have 3 daughters. One we adopted and 2 conceived through IVF. My husband and I struggled with infertility throughout the duration of our marriage, which is just over 20 years. So that's kind of my background in where I am regarding Shiloh and my experience here.
So you had mentioned in previous discussions that you and your husband did struggle with infertility. And can you just share a little bit about your IVF journey and maybe the information you had about the Church's teaching regarding IVF before and then afterwards?
Sure. My husband and I adopted our oldest daughter. And then we didn't really care much about our infertility at that time because we just wanted to pursue adoption. And then we just realized that we needed to pursue infertility diagnosis after a couple of years of being married, not having had any luck getting pregnant. So we did go through diagnosis for infertility. We had male factor infertility, and IVF was recommended to us. We didn't really want to pursue it, so we held off and looked at adopting a second time, but that didn't really work the way we had hoped, so we ended up back at the fertility clinic. During that time, we did reach out to the church. My husband wasn't hugely excited about pursuing IVF. I did not grow up in the Catholic Church, and so was recently converted to Catholicism and just thought that the Catholic teaching was potentially outdated, and they needed to get with the program. So we did reach out to our priest and talked with the priest. He was not well equipped to minister us through our infertility, did share kind of the Church's teaching, and that was about it. So we then pursued IVF because when we went to the fertility clinic, they were ready to receive us. They knew how to handle our issues. They knew what to do. They knew how to talk to us. So we were like, oh, somebody who is familiar with what we're talking about. But we did pursue IVF. We have two children that were conceived through IVF. We had a total of 10 others that died in the process as embryonic children, either through miscarriage or through just the difficulties of the IVF process. A few years ago, right before COVID, we were kind of looking at our budget. I was a stay-at-home mom. We were figuring out our finances, and this monthly reminder of cryopreservation kind of got us thinking, what are we going to do with these remaining embryonic children? And we hadn't really, I tried to tell myself that they weren't life, that they looked like a droplet of water, that, they weren't little lives. And through prayer and discernment about what to do with them, really came to the conclusion that they were indeed little lives that were in somewhat of a predicament, being frozen. And so my husband and I decided that we would attempt to transfer them to grow our family, to save them from the freezer. The first two, we initially got pregnant and miscarried, and then the second two did not survive the thawing process. So they weren't ever transferred. So after that, we didn't really want to do IVF, but that was the only way we could save our children from the freezer. So kind of once that occurred, we had to follow up with our physician. And I'm like, how do we tell people about this? And they kind of looked at us with a blank stare, like, what's the problem? As you would expect an IVF doctor to do. So really began thinking about how we could share. And we have experience with infertility, miscarriage, IVF, conversion, and thought about IVF to align with the church's teaching, because we experienced every concern that the church has with it. So was looking to figure out how to share, and that kind of leads into Shiloh a bit.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, my condolences to you and your husband for that journey that you experienced. I'm sure that as a mother and a father, that is a big burden. And I'm happy that God has been present in your life through all of that. Before we move into Shiloh ministry, for some people, we've heard about IVF. We know people who have used it. We've, maybe walked alongside them as they've desired a family. Can you just share a little bit about that process? I sometimes wonder if people don't realize that it is somewhat invasive to men and women, but also just what that means then to have embryos in a freezer. What is it like when you are in the midst of all of that?
Sure. So we went into the fertility clinic. They, of course, do a variety of tests to see what issues you're struggling with. And then I think at the time, I thought that they were kind of evaluating our infertility for how to treat our infertility, like as a whole. But as I reflect back on it, I think that was more teeing us up for IVF, like making sure that the IVF is going to be successful, and that's a fine line. But I think it is a line when you're talking about things like restorative reproductive medicine versus reproductive endocrinology. But so you go in for your evaluation. There is a financial evaluation looking at your finances. And there's a certain amount of insurance. Like so IVF becomes more successful the more cycles that you do. So, really, depending on your age, it's about 35 to 55% successful, but that is after several cycles generally. So a cycle, typically you're taking some medicines to tee up the female. They kind of slow her cycle down. So I was on birth control, a variety estrogens, variety of medicines, including intramuscular shots, which were every day. And My husband had to give them to me, which he's squeamish around needles. But then part of the process is harvesting both the eggs from the woman and the sperm from the man. So typically, getting that sperm from a man involves masturbation, separating from the wife into a lab room. And the harvest from the female for the eggs involves a procedure in a kind of an operating room. And up until that time, they're trying to stimulate as many eggs as possible, because the thought is that the more eggs you can fertilize with the sperm, then the more embryos you have, which can make IVF more successful. So once they had 16 eggs from me and, sperm from my husband, and they fertilize those in the lab. So the act of fertilization occurs in the lab. The mom and dad aren't even around because it's days that they grow. And then you're called back for the transfer of the embryo. And all this time up, you get ultrasounds and lab work, and they're testing all that stuff. So it's pretty intense. And then when they harvest the eggs, once they fertilize, they let you know how many that they fertilized. And so they were able to fertilize 12 eggs for us. So we had 12 embryos to start with. And then by the time that they were able to grow for a few days, we had ultimately 7 embryos that were worth trying to transfer, or so the doctor said. And so they transferred the first one, and we successfully had our daughter. And then we miscarried another later down the road, and then we were able to conceive with our second daughter, and then kind of had our last 4 frozen for a few years. What it means frozen is a fresh cycle, meaning that's when they're harvesting the eggs, is a bit more of a procedure and more medicines and more costly. So they end up growing the embryos for just a day or two longer, and then putting them in, I don't know if it's liquid nitrogen or something like that, but putting them in a tank, like putting them in little tubes or something, and putting them in a freezer. And that remains in the lab until, I don't know, eternity, I suppose, or until you're ready to use them again. So they're trying to save from the fresh cycle again, reduce costs for the parents, I suppose, of a fresh cycle, reduce harm of the fresh cycle again, because overstimulating the ovaries does put a female at risk. So that's kind of IVF in a nutshell, or our experience.
You said it was intense. You weren't kidding.
Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing to me, I guess, looking back on it, I think, you're supposed to be intimate with your husband, right? Or your wife. Like, you're supposed to be having this loving moment where you're, one giving the gift to another, and you're both giving of yourselves. And that act was completely separated from us, and to get our babies reunited with us, my husband's standing beside me and the doctor is the one I'm looking at, and it kind of like you get an intimate moment afterwards. They're like, well, stay here, for however long you want. And that's like not really ideal,
Well, for sure, it very much cheats the spouses out of, that unitive and procreative act.
Well, it cheats the kids
and the child.
Yes. It cheats the kids out of the loving embrace of their parents and being housed in that warm, nurturing environment. They're exposed to who knows what.
So from your experience, obviously, and you're doing a great job of articulating the challenges, and so much of that does align with church teaching. At what point then did the Shiloh ministry come together, or that you became involved in it? If you could kind of share that with us.
Sure. So after our experience trying to save our final four embryonic children, we really began to believe that we had a story to share, and we part of getting there was attending some pro-life walks and things like that. And I remember thinking, this is all about abortion, but I don't see IVF. It's very like people don't realize this is a problem. And so I began reaching out to infertility organizations like Springs in the Desert, the Fruitful Hollow, our priest, whoever I could think of. Like, I need to share this with people so they understand the harm. And in part of my reaching out, the ladies at the Fruitful Hollow said, hey, our theological editor right now is working on a post IVF project. Since you have experience with IVF, would you be willing for us to connect you? And so I got connected with Chelsea and our other co-founder. They had already done some research with couples who had been through IVF, trying to find pain points and what was going on, but they didn't have the IVF experience. So it was like the divine, I guess, intervention of the Holy Spirit bringing us together to then create Shiloh. So we officially, I guess, got our 501c3 about a year and a half ago. We launched our website in April of last year. And so have just kind of been slowly dabbling into the foray of the post IVF ministry, because there's really not anything out there. It's just now with everything in the media and things like that, that IVF is getting on people's radar. But you kind of end up saying IVF to people and they're like, oh, I don't know that we want to touch, I don't know that we want to touch that, because that opens up a whole new can of worms. But it's kind of been opened, and Shiloh's been in the works. So we're ready to receive, folks where they are.
Your timing has been impeccable with it being out in the news, and with the administration trying to make IVF available to more people. At least it's given Catholics an opportunity to talk about what the church teaches. And as people I know have been talking, there's a lot of us that really didn't understand fully the church's teaching on IVF. Is that your experience too, that you found talking to other Catholics or other parents?
Yeah, I think there's some people who know, right? I mean, there's people who just know church teaching and they're going to abide by it, and it's like not going to falter from it. But there's a lot of people on the fringes that are like, this makes babies. We don't get what the problem is. And there's a lot of problems, and I think the one thing that the church hasn't done well is make the ministering to infertile couples accessible. And so that's part of us, is we just didn't see anything in the church about infertility. They're saying be fruitful and multiply, and everybody's having 10 kids, and we're like sitting there like, we don't have any, so we're not great. And so I think we got a long way to go on the infertility side of things as well. But yeah, I think people just in general, family members, friends, people in the church just aren't hugely well educated about it and what it fully is, because on the surface it seems great. It's giving people the opportunity to have children.
Agreed. I do want to point out there is a link on the diocese website, and we'll put it in the notes, linking directly to you. So it's just scdiocese.org/Shiloh. But that'll be in the show notes. Carmen put that up a few months back for the Faith Formation Office. And I did go through it and read so much in there. I personally learned a lot about the IVF process and the church's stance. So I personally can say there's a lot of information on here. Do you want to just share with the listeners what all is on the site, what they can find there, because there's a lot.
Yeah, so we have a lot of education out there for just the moral and ethical teachings of IVF for both church related and just general ethics, bioethics, and theology type stuff. Um, but we also have an honoring page for couples who have been through IVF. They can honor any embryonic children regardless of what stage they're in. They could be in cryopreservation, or they could have died, or they could be living children out there and their, family feels sorry that they did this and want to honor them in a certain way. So, we have the honoring page. We also have an opportunity for folks to share their testimonies regarding IVF. We review all of that stuff prior to it being displayed on the internet. And then we have a mentoring program that people can be matched with mentors that we have who have either been through IVF themselves, have been through infertility, or they're deacon. We have a variety of mentoring volunteers that are matched with folks to help kind of guide through some thinking about IVF, who God is, who he made us to be, what is marriage supposed to be, how we got in the position of using IVF. There's no judgment. We're really here to receive and help people process their story. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts.
Now, would you be able to share the background information of the other two women with whom you work? I know that remaining faithful to Catholic teaching is always a big concern with the IVF discussion, but one of the other women, does she have a degree in bioethics? Is that correct?
She does,
Okay.
yes. Yes. And she also has experience with infertility. Our other co-founder happens to have natural twins, and people started asking her if she used IVF, and she's like, I don't even know what that is. So she started looking and is like, oh. So she just got interested in IVF in that way. Mm-hmm.
I did make a note to myself about the consultation offered. Is that the mentoring that you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. So that is available
Yes.
for people.
Sometimes it is not, we have a scriptural guide that kind of we go through with folks that offers, again, like who God is, offers them questions to reflect on. So we kind of guide people through that with a mentor so they can bounce ideas off of each other, have some directed accompaniment. But then other people are just, we've had people ask, I'm considering IVF. It's not necessarily post IVF, but they just want to hear more information about it and the church's teaching, or people wrestling with, we made the decision to discard our last embryo. Am I excommunicated now from the church? And so kind of wrestling with reconciliation, just different things about church teaching and stuff like that. And then concerned for their living children who may or may not know they're conceived of IVF. They don't know that there was a donor that was used. So there's different things that people are wrestling with. And so we kind of take where they are and then help either promote healing and peace, or discernment for if they have remaining embryos in cryopreservation. What does the church teach about those? What you can do.
Or people considering it. Sounds like they can get that education as well. I can't remember if it was directly on your site, Katie, or if it was something Carmen put on. It was slips that you could take in or give to priests to have in the confessional. People, trying to get that healing post IVF. Whichever one of you put it on there, if you would comment to that, because I don't remember.
Yeah, I know we have talked about it. I don't know that we have anything out there just yet, but that is something that we are hoping to do, is to have it have something like a confession card with the priests. And if somebody is in confession saying, I need, I have discarded embryos, I need to confess this, the priest can hand a card to say, hey, you can talk to Shiloh, but we have created kind of an examination of conscience form regarding IVF to kind of say these are the things you need to think about as you consider reconciliation.
Yeah, we had created just some small ones just with the website on there. As you mentioned, when you encountered your parish priest years ago and those initial conversations, sometimes I know that they don't feel the best equipped for those conversations, even with the best hearts, best of intentions. And so we were hoping to help them know that even if they don't feel like they can assist men and women as they go through and heal and really integrate into their hearts that what conversion or just that openness to God's grace for healing, that there are people who will accompany them along that way. And I think this is a perfect conversation to have during the Jubilee year of hope as well. There's hope for us all. No one is beyond the mercy of God. And, God bless you and the other mentors who will take people under your wings. And God is using your story for his good. So I just think that's wonderful.
Katie, do you have any parting advice you want to offer for couples that might be struggling with their fertility and want to stay true to their Catholic faith?
I have a couple recommendations. One, there are some great organizations that are around to help. The Fruitful Hollow has a bunch of great information with a Sisters of Hannah mentoring group that offers companionship for folks in their infertility. And Springs in the Desert is also a great Catholic infertility ministry to help folks just think about Christ over conception. So I recommend those. I do recommend for people who are not sure what the church teaching is. I read over, there's two documents that are really powerful in understanding the church teaching. The USCCB has some great information, but Donum Vitae and Dignitas Personae are like amazing documents and thinking about the beauty of humanity and what the human person is and why we don't want to degrade who we are by using IVF. Just that we really deserve a whole lot more than IVF can offer and who we are as humans. So I would say if you're struggling with what the church is teaching, read those documents and take them to heart and just feel what they're trying to tell you. And certainly ask questions of people. You're welcome to ask us at Shiloh if you're considering it. But, I also think don't be afraid to speak up. Infertility is so isolating and you don't want to have to share your story. But the more that we can share, the more people will know about it and they'll know how many people suffer with it. And so we can increase awareness of just the concept of infertility.
This is definitely one of the hard topics. Definitely one of the hard topics of the church. And you have spoken so beautifully of your experience. And that just takes such bravery to share your story. And we're so grateful.
Thank you. I'm hoping that, they kind of say that the greatest opportunity for healing is in your biggest weakness, right? And your desert experience. And certainly infertility and IVF was kind of our desert experience. And so I hope that Shiloh can help lead people to the healing of God, and the peace truly that Jesus and God offer, like I was able to find there.
Well, how beautifully put. And you're correct. This is an area where all of us at the diocesan and parish levels can both increase our efforts to aiding and assisting and accompanying those with, that cross of infertility, and being able to, in a way, partner and promote Shiloh just really helps us out so much in being able to connect people. So thank you again, Katie, for spending your time with us today. Thank you for sharing your story. The vulnerability that takes is very inspiring, for me to think about how, you're able to use your story to help others in their own healing. So thank you for sharing your story as well as about Shiloh Ministry. As Dawn mentioned, there is a link on our website with some information, but also you can also Google it and you'll hit their website as well. So thank you to all of our listeners for following Illuminating Catholics. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this conversation today. We really hope that this aids you in your own journey. And, who knows when you'll encounter someone and the opportunity to share this information with them. So thank you for following, for joining us. And we hope that you stick with us so you can continue to learn more about the faith.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Follow us for more episodes on topics of the Catholic faith. For more diocesan news, visit lumenmedia.org.